In the previous few videos, we took a closer look at some of the design principles that we can use to design secure systems. In other words, systems that are designed and built to be defensible right from the moment that there's still an idea in someone's head. The reason why we are doing it at design time is that it is much more effective, but also much less expensive to do it then, rather than having to bolt things on at the end. We discussed a whole range of different design principles, starting from least privilege all the way up to, secure defaults, for example. What we realized is that there are a lot of different principles that can be put together. But how each of these principles needs to be used and when is something that we haven't really talked about. And that's what we'll address in this video. So even when you are an experienced professional, starting from scratch or doing an analysis on a completely new system or a new network is daunting. And because of that, it's easy to miss things or to skip steps. Fortunately, different organizations have put together reference frameworks. These are basically big plans that you can consult and say, if I follow the steps in this framework or think about the things that are discussed in this framework, I should be able to design and build a defensible system right from the beginning. There are many. Some of the most well-known ones are the ISO 27000 standards. It's an international standardization effort to come up with an information security management system. There's a lot of different publications in there, and each of those goes step by step on how you would build the organization and manage the organization around defensible systems. COBIT isn't really a security framework. It's more an IT delivery framework, but with that in mind, IT cares about security, or at least IT should care about security. So if we're managing IT to the best of our efforts, hopefully that leads to secure and well-managed systems also. So it's worth taking a look at COBIT as well. NIST, the National Institutes for Standards and Technology in the United States, has a whole lot of documentation out there in their special publication 800 series. There's a lot of good information in that. Some is high level, some is incredibly detailed at a very low, deep technical level. All of it is worth reading. There's a lot of guidance that they give or even prescribe if you're a government organization. OWASP is a global organization of volunteers, primarily. It's the Open Web Application Security Project. It's not really a design framework, but it is a framework where they identify common mistakes in designing and building web applications. And what they do is outline what these mistakes are, what the consequences of each of them is, and of course how to prevent those mistakes from being made. And as such, OWASP Top 10 is a good framework to work off. It's reviewed on a regular basis, it's updated on a regular basis. Not every year we see an update, so that means that even if you look at the OWASP website, the latest version might be a few years old, but it's probably still relevant. OWASP has a lot of other initiatives going as well, and it is a global organization of volunteers, and there is generally no membership fee associated with being part of OWASP. It's highly recommended to take a look at what they have to offer. And then lastly, the one that we need to talk about is the Australian Signals Directorate, basically the NSA of the Australians. They have put out a number of strategies to mitigate cybersecurity incidents. And those are controls, countermeasures that they propose and claim that they will reduce the chance of a data breach by sometimes up to 90%. And that's only by taking a couple of these measures you would put yourself in a much more defensible system. So that's worth taking a look at. So as mentioned before, the ISO 27000 series, an internationally recognized framework for best practices in information security management. And so the emphasis is on management. It's not a technical set of standards, it's a management set of standards. but they do address a whole bunch of things that we need to take into consideration, because an information system, and hopefully a secure information system, never sits in isolation. It is part of business processes, it exists in an environment, it's operated by and for people, and all of those things need to be managed. The ISO 27000 series gives good guidance as to what you can and cannot do. It's not to the extent that everything that's written in this series is something that you have to do, but it is something that you have to think about and then make a conscious decision or whether or not you feel it's appropriate for your organization to follow a recommendation, and then secondly, in how to do it in your organization. So looking at these 27000 series or any of the other frameworks is absolutely worth to make up your mind. There are different volumes in the series. They're listed on the slide. 27001 is all talking about how do you require with the, how do you comply, with the series. What kind of controls could you implement in 27002, and in 27003 gives implementation guidance. Unfortunately, they are not freely available. They are for pay, so you can't really run through them, although there are quite a few high-level overviews of what the standards include. COBIT, as mentioned before, is not a security framework. It's an IT management framework. Again, a best practice framework that tells you what kind of controls you could be implementing when you manage a IT organization. Most of the systems delivery or the service delivery with the systems that we secure is done through an IT department. And again, being able to organize with an IT department how to best deliver these services will lead to a much better defensible service. Especially when you start looking at things like risk management, issue management, incident response, business continuity planning. There's a lot of good content in COBIT. There's also going to be quite a bit of content that, as a security professional, we're not that interested in, but that's okay. It's just going to help us form our thoughts. NIST, in their special publications, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, is very wide. They have publications talking about cryptography, then they have very deep levels of cryptography, how to implement cryptography, how to deploy cryptography, and they have higher level publications such as the general NIST cybersecurity framework. From that perspective, you could say they're all over the place, but every single document that they write is of high quality and is fairly relevant. The cybersecurity framework that I just mentioned is focusing on using business drivers to guide cybersecurity activity. Traditionally, cybersecurity or information security is something that was driven by technologists. And as the technologists have to start an argument with someone in the business, someone who actually makes the money, you're always going to lose unless you can make a very clear value proposition in the terms of the people, in the terms that they understand. So the framework is one of those approaches. How do we think about cybersecurity from a business perspective rather than from a technical perspective? In this course, we'll primarily stay at that business level, and then in CS 380 we switch and we go much narrower and deeper into the technology. OWASP Top 10 is then also one of those standards that we will explore in more depth in CS 380, the successor to this course. We will explore all kinds of vulnerability types introduced by OWASP. We'll learn how to do SQL injections. We learn about cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery. We learn about things like direct object reference. We learn about authorization and access control models. All kinds of fairly detailed level things that are important to secure an infrastructure from a technical perspective. And OWASP gives very good guidance when it comes to web applications. They also have some good information about mobile apps and the use of APIs, application programming interfaces. And ASD, the Australian Signals Directorate, I'll put the link also in the show notes here, they have developed these strategies. Basically what they said is there are 4 strategies, only 4. And if you implement those 4 strategies, what do they say? 85% of adversarial techniques are mitigated. Well, that's a huge number. It cannot be that simple. And of course it isn't. If we look closer at these strategies, and see if I have those on a slide. No, we don't. We might start seeing things like application whitelisting. It's a very effective strategy, which basically enables a computer only to run the software that it trusts. Unfortunately, operationally, it is very difficult to actually achieve that level of control over a computer system. There are so many different moving parts. There are constantly systems that update or self-update, and maintaining a whitelist is going to be extraordinarily difficult. That one control by itself is an extraordinarily effective security control, but it is a very difficult control to implement. There's a few others that they have in there that are worth exploring. So where does this put us? Well, what we've learned so far in this topic, in the secure design principles and reference frameworks topic, is just that. If we want to design and build an information system that is defensible, we have to pay attention to that from day one, from the beginning. If we are having to go back after the fact and then re-engineer a system that was not necessarily designed with security in mind, it's always going to be a patchwork of solutions. And that means that we will have an expensive solution and a solution that is not very effective. So in order to get cost effectiveness and outcome effectiveness in place, we need to design from the beginning. We have a whole bunch of different strategies and different principles that we can adhere to when we do that. How we do that is described or prescribed in some cases by these frameworks, the ones that I just mentioned in this video. All of those together we can use to design new systems. We can also use them to analyze existing systems and see if there are any gaps that we need to remediate. Over the next couple of weeks of this semester, we'll start looking closer at what kind of countermeasures we could implement. Next week, for example, we'll start talking about authentication and figuring out what authentication means, why we would use it, where we would use it, and how we would use it, and then compare that with the principles that we introduced here, such as need to know or least privilege. Before I can assign privilege, I need to know who you are. So authentication is a prerequisite, just as about anything else we do. That's the next topic we'll cover in this program. That is for now. Next week, new topic, authentication.